day one of Cannes, guys. Our discussion today, focusing on how AI agents are increasingly influencing how customers purchase, discover, and consider brands. We'll cover what this means for the media ecosystem. We'll cover what this means for brands and the kind of things they should be considering to prepare for the next wave of innovation. So onto our panelists. We have James, the CEO of Reward, who are part of the Rezolve group. James formerly held C-suite roles at MasterCard, founded data and insight businesses 5one and Truata. So yeah, certainly key to understanding how the media ecosystem works with finance, media, and transactional data. We've got CJ, who's joining us from Mashreq. He leads existing customer relationships for Mashreq, previously at Visa, so another real leader in the finance space. We've got Howe, who is VP of Partnerships at Rezolve. Rezolve are clearly leading the way when it comes to AI, Agentic AI, and how that's impacting commerce. And we've got Rowena, who is CEO and founder at Starcount. And Starcount do amazing things, collating different data and using that to inform how brands plan, target, and measure their advertising activity. So thanks for joining us, guys. I'm going to come to you, Howe, first. So I think let's take a step back, right, and think about agentic commerce. What do we actually mean by that? Is it just customers kind of searching on ChatGPT for product recommendations, or is it more than that?
It's a little bit more than that. And I think all of us are at this point, we're still trying to figure it out. But if you think about e-commerce, it's been around for 20, 25 years, and it's largely been the same in terms of how do we design to serve humans, whether it's through a search bar, whether it's filters, whether it's clicks, and a lot of that has been relatively similar. You know, mobile has evolved it a little, but for the most part, it's been the same. But we all know in 2022, ChatGPT exploded onto the scene, and 4 years later, we are now in a completely different world in terms of how we think about AI. So to me, agentic commerce is how do we design for machines or agents to essentially buy on behalf of humans. And that is a fundamentally different kind of mindset and a different approach in terms of everything from marketing to activations to merchandising to pricing and so forth, because ultimately agents and machines are to a certain degree rule-based, but because of AI, there's also a probabilistic element to it as well. And so how do you design commerce for something that is able to scan hundreds and thousands of websites and merchant portals and so forth, and be able to compare everything from price to sustainability to, to quality of materials, to colors, to preferences, versus humans that go from one site to, another app to another site and so forth. And also, I think a big fundamental difference is this is extremely disruptive in terms of the kind of the loop, right? In terms of understanding the entire customer journey. Now customers are starting their journey on a ChatGPT, on a Claude, on a Gemini, and that is largely invisible to a lot of merchants and retailers and brands that are expecting to understand the entire journey. And now all we're getting is that last click. So to me, a lot of agentic commerce is about how do we make sure we're discoverable? How do we make sure that we're surfacing the right products, experiences, and services to meet the intent of the actual consumer, which is the humans? And then how do we price and incentivize that continuous journey along the way? And how do we make sure we have full visibility of that? And that, again, requires us to rethink commerce fundamentally.
Right. So, James, how's that different to what we have today? I mean, we've had Google search algorithms for 20 years. Is it ripping up the rulebook, or is it an evolution?
Yeah, look, I think Hal said it very clearly there in terms of the disruption across the customer journey, right? From intent, search, discovery, through to actually buying and outcomes, right? So there are fundamental shifts happening in front of our very eyes. As I was thinking about this panel today, I kind of look back at ChatGPT, and you alluded to it, Hal, right? So it took ChatGPT 2 months to get 100 million users. In the 90s, it took 7 years for the internet to go from 50 to 100 million users. So the pace of change is absolutely astounding, right? So, we can sit here today, and in a couple of years, I think things will be way further on. So it's great to hear from visionaries like Hal, right, in terms of how this is kind of disrupting the market. I think fundamental to this is really thinking about the underlying data as well. So as agents start to make decisions, start to better understand and be more relevant to customers, start to be much more personalized to customers, the underlying data is absolutely critical. So I think, as a brand, how do you sort of decide what is the most relevant data? We'll hear from Rowena a lot about the unique data Starcount has in terms of understanding people's motivations. At Reward, we have unique access to transaction data. So we work with major banks around the world, and that gives us this unrivaled view into how customers are behaving, not just within a retail environment like retail media might, but across the whole categories, right? So to Howe's point around this fragmentation of customer journeys, I think having this holistic view that you can get from a bank's transaction data is absolutely critical, really, to help agents learn and ultimately close that loop, right? As you say, measurement is so important. I think everyone today is under pressure, every marketer, to demonstrate an ROI and justify why they are investing, where they're investing. So having the data that can really provide that sort of deterministic measurement is key.
Thanks. I think James has teed you up nicely there, Rowena. So what's the data
Thank
telling us?
you. So I guess for me, the exciting thing about agentic commerce is the bringing together of large language models with large behavioral models. So we've been using behavioral models for personalization in retail, in banking for a while now. And the ability to now have an interface that a consumer can interact with is kind of going to make that journey really engaging and exciting for them. I think, as James mentioned, what I really champion is understanding the context that sits behind that. One of my favorite stories actually is when Amazon launched their recommendation model. You could, if you went onto Amazon in the US and you searched for a baseball bat, what item would get recommended next? It would be a baseball and a baseball glove. If you did that in the UK, it would be a balaclava. So it was like literally just doing what the data told you, but that sits behind it. But what you need is the context of who that person is, what they care about. And if that was, I don't know, a little old lady doing it for safety reasons, that would have terrified her. So I think the opportunity that this presents is bringing in that understanding of the why and being able to use the large language model and the agent to start to learn more about that customer and combine that with the behavioral indicators. So it really is a step change in personalization and loyalty.
Right. So I guess it's really important to think about what this means for your customers. So CJ, how are you using some of this technology to improve things for customers at Mashreq?
Yeah, thank you. The thing that's really surprised me is actually how customers are outsourcing decisions, how freely, how confidently they're feeling to be able to do that. We're seeing it on investment platforms, for example, where they've got AI built in now, where the AI can analyze your portfolio, give you recommendations based on the goals you want to achieve. And all a user needs to do is go in and execute. We're doing the same thing at Mashreq Neo. So earlier this year, we launched a feature called Money Insights. Now, what that does is you go into your digital banking app, you're used to seeing your balance, but what does that mean? Are you actually understanding your financial behaviors? And Money Insights does that. It tells you, here's what your last 6 months of spends has been. Here's 2 transactions at Amazon for the same value at the same time. Did you have a duplicate transaction? Do you need to do a chargeback? Click here and you can do it. And we're taking it a step further as well, right? We're not just giving the insights, we're giving the recommendation. So imagine a scenario, you've got, and many people in the region, we're in Dubai, where we operate across the UAE, we're expanding. But in the UAE, a transient economy, many people are living there, coming from a new place, still learning how their finances work. And therefore, they'll tend to keep most of the money in one account, in their current account, and until they understand how their outgoings are like. Imagine you get a recommendation which says, hey, look, your outgoings are X, your income is Y, you're leaving so much money on the table. Do you want to move the difference into a savings account? We can safely see that you'll be okay. Click here and we'll get it done for you. So those kind of recommendations is what I think customers are ready for, because they're already doing it outside in their everyday life.
Darren, just to jump in, because building on what CJ was saying there, right? I think trust is really, really important in this space. And I think what you have as a bank and, Mashreq is a trusted relationship with the customer, right? So I think that ability to like kind of offer like self-driving money almost as the future vision where actually, Mashreq is automatically optimizing your kind of portfolio or financial services. I think it's hugely powerful as a bank, but for any brand in this space, right, the trust component is really important. And if you're a grocer, fine, if you screw up the order once, no one's really going to mind if you've got the wrong detergent. But, on kind of more serious like financial investment decisions, right, you need to get it spot on. So the key is the data.
Yeah, what surprised me is the confidence that consumers have there, and especially when it comes to your bank. This is your money, this is your livelihood at stake, right? And people are taking big decisions. So we need to rise to that consumer's confidence. So we've moved from providing visibility to insights to recommendations, and the natural next step will be once the consumer's ready, is how do you move into execution, automation.
Yeah, and sorry, maybe I want to just say that I think that's actually one of the biggest challenges of humanity going forward is how much agency we give to agents, right? Because the decision-making power that we give to machines fundamentally decides what we do ourselves versus what we allow machines to do. Is it health data? Is it nutritional data? Is it work data and so forth? But I also think that, even the grocery example, sure, like if you order milk and maybe it got the wrong size milk is wrong, maybe not a big deal. But if you said, I need a recipe for dinner and my child is allergic to, say, cheese and dairy, and you got that wrong based on the recipe you recommend and the ingredients that you put in, that could have more serious implications, right? And so going back to the whole trust factor, it is absolutely critical, important that the AI understands, number one, the intent, number two, the context, but number three, the recommendations that it can provide is actually safe. It's, and it's trusted by the end consumer, because there's some things you cannot make mistakes on, especially when it comes to health and finance. Actually, I think it's one of those areas where, you make a mistake and it can have a lot of ripple implications as well, right? So I think that trust factor is so important, which is also why I think from a Rezolve perspective, we generally talk about LLMs and large language models, but we're now starting to see the rise of VSLMs, versus vertical small language models, that is very specific to either a industry vertical or a function or an activity or even a company, where instead of having a model that is so good at everything that might make a mistake versus a model that is very good at selling clothes, right? Or very good at being a nutritionist, and it will not screw up that piece of what it's supposed to do. And I think that's going to be, the agents are going to be much more specialized, and I think the models are going to be much more specialized as well.
Great. So some really practical examples there. So safe to say this isn't just hype, this is real and it's happening today.
I can give an example. So look, the example on Money Insights that I just gave, what we are seeing is much higher conversion rates. So for anything to be hype, what it has to be able to do is it having an impact on your bottom line? Are you seeing a difference? And we're seeing that with recommendations. We got 1 in 5 customers interacting with the recommendations that we're providing, which is great. But what really matters is, do they act on them? And when customers, you're linking insight with a recommendation, they understand why you're telling them something, and they're more inclined to want to do it. So when you can see yourself shaping how customers behave, it's something very real.
So I guess not everyone is as forward-thinking as Mashreq might be. So if there's any brands out there who are still a bit skeptical, what sort of practical advice would you give them? James, I'll go to you on that one.
Yeah, look, I think the kind of toothpaste out of the tube, right? So if you're a brand and you're going, well, is this really going to happen? It's happening, right? So you kind of need to get ready. I think central is the piece around the data, and I think it's thinking broader than just your own first-party data is really, really important. So like we've said, kind of enriching your own data with transaction data, with sentiment or motivational data. So you can really kind of create this holistic view of the customer and the customer journey, I think is absolutely critical. I think there's probably, 3 types of thinking I see in this area. One is kind of the people that, this is happening, right? Customers are already, using agents to, search, discover and pay, right? We've heard that from Howe. I think there's the camp that's kind of very much like, hold on a minute, what happens when it goes wrong, right? It's all great when, the agent gets it right, but what happens, your example around, the kind of the dairy allergy, whatever, I think is a good one. I think, who's responsible right then? If an agent's buying, where's the kind of ultimate kind of confidence and trust for the consumer, right? And I think that's a big thing that we'll have to develop as we go forward. And then I think the third thing for brands is just really the sort of the paradigm shift that you're maybe not talking direct to consumers anymore. And how do you kind of influence purchasing where there's this kind of agent layer, right? And I think for big companies, big brands, I think they'll obviously navigate that like they've done with, the kind of walled gardens and all that good stuff, right? But for smaller brands, is that going to kind of restrict them from being able to access consumers, right? So I think that's going to be a really interesting kind of development.
And Rowena, anything kind of you'd think in terms of how to be ready for this? What advice would you give?
Yeah, I guess, if you're still skeptical about this, I mean, I totally agree with you. It's already happening. I think as well, consumers are always going to do something that makes things more convenient. And ultimately, this is convenience, right? It's still the location of your supermarket that drives which supermarket you choose. It's always, we are a time poor species, and convenience is very key. So I definitely think that is, it's holding back on this is not the right way forward. I think for me, what is most unknown but also most exciting is who to hang your hat on, who's going to be a winner in this space. You've obviously got the major tech providers who are all trying to tackle this. When we're talking about it being full funnel, going from search, discoverability and payments, you've got banks, you've got social platforms, you've got engines, you've got tech companies and AI large language model companies. How are these all going to come together, and how are we going to have a new ecosystem that ultimately is not just how consumers engage with us as brands, but how we reach them and become front of mind when we want to advertise to them? Because I think, we'll be sat here in, hopefully we'll all be sat here in 10 years and it will have changed massively in terms of how we're reaching and advertising to consumers, and it will be more data-led. But to your point, that trust and transparency has to be there, and no one's going to want for everyone to have all of their data. So finding the right points and that sort of vertical specific is really key, I think.
So if it's all about the data, I mean, we're here in Cannes. You walk along the Croisette, you've got Google, you've got Spotify, you've got all of these major major media companies and publishers. They already got loads of data. So is it just a case of the rich get richer, or is there scope for disruption? And how?
I think one of the things that we've seen over and over again, especially in technology, is that there's some guy in a garage somewhere working on a new way of thinking, new way of doing things that's completely disruptive. I mean, James brought up the example of 2 months, 100 million with ChatGPT, but we're seeing Anthropic today has now exceeded market share from Anthropic. And so you might think you're king of the hill, but, whether it's from regulatory impacts or whether it's from consumer kind of expectations and preferences, things can change. So I think just because you're top dog today doesn't mean you're always going to be top dog. And especially in the world of agentic commerce or agentic AI, I think how you train these models, and again, we're seeing differences. If I look at it from a global scale, you have open weight, open source model that's coming more from the East versus kind of frontier models that's coming more from the West, right? And those are two different philosophical approaches and how you think about models. And then if you think about the business case for the use of models, we're all seeing today the cost of tokens for using models absolutely skyrocketing. We're all paying hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars per person per month on these models. And so what model is good enough? What model is actually needed at that frontier level? I think these are all things that we need to figure out. But if I was to bring it back to kind of agentic commerce, when I think about what's actually needed, there's been a lot of examples where we've shown great successes, but we have also seen examples where it hasn't been so successful. So Walmart has seen where their on-site conversion using their own proprietary chat experience is actually 3 times better than on ChatGPT, right? We've seen how OpenAI has attempted to do advertisement, to do retail media in conversational AI, and they're one of the first. But it hasn't worked out too well. In fact, Anthropic was one of the first to make fun of them in a Super Bowl ad last year. But, but these are things where people are continually pushing the boundaries of how we advertise, how we spend money. And when I think about the data that we have, it's yes, there's consumer data, there's third-party data, there's product data. I mean, at Rezolve, we're very used to understanding consumer intent based on the conversational experience and then translating that in real time to surface the right products because we can enrich the product catalog in real time to surface those products in a conversational flow. So if I know a customer is going to Cannes for, a conference next week, I can then essentially enrich the product descriptions so that a white dress or, a pair of trousers is fitting for Cannes because I know it's hot and I know it's Southern France, I know it's a formal environment and so forth. So that type of real-time enrichment of data, just even on the product side, is really important to be able to not only understand intent, but actually surface products to meet the intent. And then if you're able to combine also the consumer data, the personalization of that, then that becomes really powerful. And so this to me is where retail media and the finance media networks, you bring that together. I mean, I think the opportunities are boundless.
What we're saying is for every Google, there's always an Ask Jeeves.
Much better than mine.
And CJ, how is it changing how Mashreq are approaching their media strategy in terms of customer acquisition, loyalty, retention, etc.?
Yeah, look, good question. I think we've talked already about the foundations that you need to have in place. Data, we talked about customer trust. You also talked about privacy. But then beyond that, I think what we're starting to look at and what we're seeing as well is taking it to the acquisition side. We're seeing a reduced volume coming through organic Google searches because less people are Googling, hey, which is the best bank account to have in the UAE. They're asking ChatGPT, which is the best bank account to have in the UAE, which makes a big shift, right? Like the decision point has changed. I'm not seeing a bunch of tabs now, which is ranking me, for example, whether I'm in the top 3, 4, 5. And then customers deciding to have a look at my website and decide if they want to bank with me. They ask ChatGPT, and ChatGPT says, the best one for this is this, and the best one for this is this. And that's it. So that decision shift has taken place. The decision now doesn't rely on the customer, it relies on AI. So we need to start thinking differently from a media strategy perspective on hold on, where am I going to get the bang for my buck? Do I carry on trying to drive awareness through organic Google searches, which actually is, in my eyes, a dying channel? It's still great for volume and scale, but that's not where decisions are being made anymore. And I need to start asking, like we need to start asking ourselves, it's no longer about where I rank, is AI going to recommend me anymore? Am I going to get recommended? Is the customer going to come to my site? It's a very different question.
And actually, just on that, I think AI doesn't understand that one. Yeah.
Siri's not getting it. Sorry.
I was just going to say on the, I think it's a super valid point, and I think again this is where how much agency do we provide to agents, but also it's important to understand why a Gemini is recommending something versus a ChatGPT or a Cloud Representative. What is the citation they're pulling? And this is where I think agentic engine optimization becomes really important. Is that yes, you want to know how you show up on these LLMs and why they're making certain recommendations. For example, and this is Lawrence taught me this, and for example, like ChatGPT has a partnership with Reddit, right? And so they pull other citations from Reddit. And so if you're going to be spending money in terms of influencing content, Reddit might be a good way if ChatGPT is important to you. But Gemini obviously trains a lot of data off of YouTube, right? And so how much do you show up on YouTube makes a big difference. And so now you have all of these LLMs that you need to, and for some of our global luxury brands, they also care about DeepSeek. They care about Quinn, they care about Kimi as well. And they also have different citations that they're pulling from in terms of understanding, consumer sentiment, in terms of understanding, where the data is being pulled from and how consistent they're showing up on these LLMs. And so I think it's really important for us to have the tools to really understand why these LMs are making those decisions, what's driving the algorithms, so that we can then do something about it.
So, James, where do you see the opportunities for a brand like Mashreq or other financial institutions? I mean, if you look at the explosion of retail media. I mean, just walk down the Croisette and you see Amazon and Sainsbury's and Tesco. The idea of that happening kind of 10 years ago would have been unheard of. So what's the opportunity for banks?
Yeah, look, I think the last 5, 7, 10 years has been about the explosion of retail media, right? So retailers realizing that brands want to connect with their consumers, and they've got digital and physical assets, right, to enable that. And I think that's been characterized with a lot of major retailers. I think from our point of view, as I mentioned before, right, that is very much for me like a walled garden. It connects you with customers within a specific retailer's domain. From my point of view, we should now be thinking about walled cities, right? And that's really where banks come to play, because they have this breadth of transaction data. So we analyze tens of millions of customers, hundreds of billions of transactions in volume and value, and that enables us to build very highly predictive and personalized models. Now, what we're delighted to announce today, and it's great that CJ's traveled over to do this, is we've just launched our finance media network with Mashreq in the UAE. So Mashreq is the leading digital bank in the region, and our finance media network, for me, is probably going to be one of the biggest things in the next 3 to 5 years. That's my prediction, is that finance media networks, most major banks will start to adopt that. And what that means is that they're a trusted source of data, a trusted source of customer relationships, and that retailers, brands, businesses looking to connect with customers will look to finance media networks to enable that. So really, really excited that we're announcing that partnership today.
No, thank you, and we're super excited by the partnership. Right, it's a Cannes exclusive. I think the PR is coming later on, but we're super excited because I talked earlier about how we're personalizing the journey and the insights and the recommendations on a customer's banking behavior. But partnering with Reward on something like this actually takes it a step further. It's what the customer's doing outside of banking. It's where they're shopping. It's where they're making purchases. And how you talked about this earlier, and so did you, right? About a grandma looking on Google and it coming up with a balaclava. Well, that's because they lack the data and understanding of the customer, whereas finance media networks don't. You've got a breadth of customer information, transactional history available to you. And so you can actually make a much better recommendation, and you can build that ecosystem with both retailers and with consumers. So we're super excited.
No, and I think just to add, thank you. I think probably 15 years ago, kind of everyone talked about loyalty programs being key. I think what we're seeing now is a real erosion of loyalty in many areas and in many categories. So, grocery retail, for example, customers are more and more promiscuous. So what a finance media network gives you is the ability to kind of look at how customers are moving in and out of your brand and across the category. Also, offline and online, which is really, really important. So it does genuinely give you that holistic view. So as a kind of brand looking to connect with a customer, you're best placed to do it.
Now I can picture as a grandma buying a baseball cap and a balaclava. It's like,
You're welcome.
scary.
And so, Rowena, you're obviously actively using payments and transaction data, and amongst other things at Starcount. How are you finding that impacting how you help agencies and brands plan and activate campaigns?
Yeah, for sure. Well, first of all, congratulations, guys. That's super exciting. And I think, as a business that's actively selling these types of data sets to advertisers, agencies, what we see is the sort of banking data that you guys have is super competitive, because it's essentially helping brands grow their share of wallet, grow their headroom within their category. But the other great thing about the large sort of behavioral data that comes through systems like these is that you get indicators of when the right moments are to trigger. So, we do a lot of work with utility brands, and we know that after 12 to 24 months, that's when people are most likely to switch, or in March at the end of the tax year, or whatever it might be. So you start to be able to find people who are switchers, promotionally promiscuous, all of these kind of things, which I think these behavioral data sets are amazing for. I think where it's really exciting for agentic commerce is that when you then combine that with the agent and the large language model to fill in the gaps that you don't know, that's where the real power comes. For the first time ever, we don't need to collect data necessarily outside of from third parties. We can actually collect it within our customer ecosystem and start to get them to share more information about what matters to them. And so bringing those two things together is going to be an incredibly powerful sort of customer facing solution.
Fantastic. Right, I think we are probably getting close to rose o'clock. So I'm gonna one more question, quick fire, guys. Just what's one thing that you want the audience to take away from today, and then we'll open it up to the audience for any questions after that. So we'll start with you, Rowena, and go along.
I would say if you take one thing away from today, is that AI is only as good as the data that's feeding it. So ultimately, the most important thing, I believe the jobs of the future will be in data governance and ethics, making sure that our models are ethically trained and representative and not perpetuating bias. And then good data and good prompt engineering. So the ability to use data in the right way, feeding the algorithms in sort of succinct ways with the right prompts to kind of get the most out of the models.
Love that. I'm going to build on that. Just add maybe what you're saying is I completely agree. And to me, AI is only as good as how much you trust it, which I think goes back to all the things that are important to you. And I think maybe one thing I'll add to it is that, we kind of touched on it with the networks, but the partnerships and ecosystems, right, that you build is going to be absolutely critical, not only in terms of helping building the guardrails and the governance and the security that's needed to protect the data and to protect the AI and the consumers, of course, but also how do you scale and expand and drive that reach and the business case that goes along with it. I think, to me, you have all these players that do things really well. And I think with AI and with the availability of data through whether it's clean rooms or data warehouses and lakes and so forth, there's so much opportunity for us to connect different players together to drive really rich opportunities that maybe we probably haven't thought about today. And I think to me, this is why I'm super excited to work in partnerships at Rezolve, is because this, again, allows us to really expand our thinking beyond just the traditional way of how we think about commerce. So to me, if that's one thing on top of kind of every amazing thing that's been said today, is really think about the partnership strategy as well.
Yeah, look, I couldn't agree more, right? That what we've covered, we're in a room full of marketers here, right? And it's less so about where you rank and where I get recommended going forward. So partnerships is key. If organic Google search is on decline and AI agentic commerce is coming up, you have to think about both those spaces. How do you advertise and market in both of those spaces, and therefore you need to be able to partner with someone that can help you drive conversion. And that's where partnerships I think is pivotal. If there's one statement I'll leave you with, and it's the future is no longer about being seen; it's about being chosen. So that's what I'd say.
That's deep.
Wow, yeah. Follow that, huh? Brilliant. I love it. Look, I think, data trust, data collaboration, I think is key. We've spoken a lot about, data collaboration, whether it's clean rooms, whatever. I think bringing together different data sets is super, super important. And then obviously it's all about finance media networks. And there's tons of good stuff happening on the Rezolve AI Hub boat over the next couple of days. So, do come back. Lots of great panelists, lots of great info to share with you. So thank you.
Thanks, guys. Anyone from the audience want to share a challenge or a question?
Just a fun question. It's Lawrence from Rezolve. Let's say we're back here in 2 years' time and we've got proactive agents buying everything for us, searching for us, working left, right and centre. What would you never let an agent buy for you?
Look, I think one of the things I started early on by saying, right, was I'm truly surprised by the confidence consumers have with AI. When we launched Money Insights, somebody fairly senior in the banking industry came up to me and said, "I don't get it. Like, I just load up my credit card statements and everything onto ChatGPT," and I'm like, "Everything?" I'm like, yeah, just put it up. I was like, "What about when you're traveling?" "Yeah, my passport, everything just goes on and I get it to fill it." So I'm like, so your ChatGPT has all your passport details, has all your banking details. Like, there's different levels of confidence. For one person, it will be I'm not going to go into finance. I'm not going to give it access to banking, right? And this is what we were talking about earlier, the customer trust. How do you build that over time? It's not going to happen overnight. Whereas, as I was surprised, for others, it's I'll put my whole life out there, right?
maybe for me, it's it's probably a cheeky answer. It's not a real answer, but to me, there's a correlation between the quality of the AI, my trust in the AI, versus the complexity of the purchase. So, for example, if I'm buying a house, which of course takes into account like my family situation, the size and the monetary amount of the purchase, I probably don't believe AI is able to help me complete that transaction today, right? Nor is the regulatory environment set up to do it either. Whereas perhaps, I don't think it's going to be 2 years, maybe it's 5 years from now. But I think to me, there's three pieces. It's the AI, kind of what James was talking about earlier around who's going to own the liability. If this house, is, for example, has a major leak or, has some structural issues with it, and this AI didn't pick up on it, who's going to own that? So unless there's some regulatory environment or some sort of insurance policy that covers the liability of it, and the model is good enough to support the holistic thinking of making that decision, then I believe I will have that confidence for the AI to do that. Right now, it's probably milk and diapers, but but 2 years from now, it could be very different. But it also depends on how far the system allows me to go.
And then a slightly tongue-in-cheek answer for you, but a glass of wine, because I'd happily let any of you guys buy me one, but I'm not going to have it with an agent. So,
Great note to end on. Thanks, everyone.